Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and I am back this week with Rick.
Hi, how are you?
Just nodding. Okay. Say hi. So if you guys listened to Monday's podcast, we talked a lot about screen time and social media and just kind of how that all plays into, society at large and addictions and all of these things. And we wanted to do a whole podcast on boundaries, and we are going to loop that in, but just boundaries in general too. Boundaries with relationships, boundaries with work, and of course boundaries with, the electronic world too, because I think that's increasingly important, especially in the climate of like the past year. Things have gotten really, really blurry with people working from home, doing everything on the computer or remote. So really excited about this because I know in particular, I have so many clients right now who are really, really struggling with boundaries with working from home. This might be the first time they've ever worked at home, ever. But not even just that, this is kind of a pervasive theme that I've seen with my clients who are struggling with this, is that seemingly because a lot of companies have either reduced the capacity of the business, or they've had to let some people go, or they maybe have reduced resources, but they're asking more. And I have so many clients who are literally like working until like 10 o'clock, and these people who aren't just like fucking off all day. It's not like they're scrolling social media and they're like, oh shit, it's 10 o'clock, better get my work done. Like, these are people who are just like busy, and now there's so many things that have to be done like through a meeting or like through a Zoom, instead of just like walking down the hallway, talking for 5 minutes, going back to your desk and working. And it's really, really interesting. And I think a lot of people are struggling, and it is hard because that boundary of being at work is very unique. You're working and then you're like, all right, it's 5, it's 6, whatever time that you get off. You used to get off, close your laptop, turn off your computer, close your door, you go home. And now that's not happening. And I'm somebody who's worked at home, or I have the ability to work at home or anywhere for as long as I've had a business. So I've had to develop these things. But a lot of people, this is again the first time they're doing it, or like I said, their businesses are like, the bosses are just asking these things that just really aren't, not even like, oh hey, it's like put your head down, we gotta work hard for like a few months. It's not like that. It's just completely different changing. So having boundaries, having conversations, I think is really important. So
yeah,
let's start.
Boundaries are, and we live in a society today where boundaries are not as clear and defined as they were in the past. And so the idea of setting boundaries, I want people to think of this as just like a fluid art. It's something that you want to constantly check and redefine and see what's working for you and what's not. I equate it to like a definition of success, right? You go ask a high school senior what the idea of success is to them. Well, going to prom, getting straight A's, maybe getting into a good college. Great, that's their idea of success. Go to a 21-year-old, like, what's your idea of success? Well, I want to graduate college, I want to graduate with honors, and I want to get a good internship, and I want to get a job. Okay, so you see how success has changed. Well, now you go to the 25, 26-year-old. What's your definition of success? Definition of success, I want to get married, I want to have kids, I want to buy a house, I want to travel the world, whatever it is. So the idea and the definition of success changes, and it evolves with who you are as a person. And boundaries are no different. What is a boundary today may not exist as a boundary tomorrow, or what isn't a boundary today might be one tomorrow. And as society changes, you want to constantly check your own boundaries and see if this is something you still want to hold on to, if it still has purpose or value, if it's served its purpose and it's no longer there, great. So I think for me, the best way to help people understand boundaries, because that's an all-encompassing term that can mean almost anything. I ask people to just think about it as rules that define who you are. Literally ask yourself, who am I and who am I not? And it starts to paint a little bit clearer picture of what you want to tolerate or not tolerate in your life. There's a lot of different ways to look at boundaries. We can look at physical boundaries in terms of actual physical touch and proximity, in terms of property and my human body. Emotional boundaries as to what I'm willing to tolerate or not tolerate. Spiritual boundaries as to what I'm willing to listen to people say and what they're not going to say. What words, what feelings, what physical touch I'm going to allow people to do to me and in specific places. Like, we train jujitsu, right? So there's a certain level of touch and intimacy that occurs in that space that would never occur in any other context. Like, there's no other space where I'm going to fall on my back and wrap somebody between my legs. That's going to be okay.
Get in my guard.
Like, I can't do that to a coworker.
I'd be like, hey bro, what the fuck?
Yeah, I can't walk up and choke someone at work that I don't like.
Well, sometimes.
That's a boundary, right? So I use that as just kind of a joke to identify, like, there are certain boundaries and certain times and places where boundaries are going to change, even though for the rest of your life or in other situations, those boundaries won't exist.
It is funny, like, imagine, like, you can't see it, like, you're not watching, you're just hearing what somebody's doing, like, and say, like, they're doing jiu-jitsu. And, like, it would just be, and even when I first started, like, watching it, like, you know, for people who are on the outside, you're like, what the fuck? Like, why is this guy sitting on this other guy's chest? Like, this is so fucking weird. Mm-hmm. And obviously, it's not like that when you're doing it and you're learning, it's like, but if you were just to completely take away, like, watching, even watching it can be, like, strange, but just hearing what people are doing, you'd be like, what do you guys mm-hmm. You're like, oh, this is what I do every 3 days a week for, 3 hours. Like, what?
Yeah, grab his neck. And you're like, huh? What are they talking about over there?
What are they doing? Oh, he's gurgling, that's fine. Yeah. You're like, wait.
Keep going. He can't breathe. He's turning red. Keep going. You're like, oh my God.
Okay.
A bunch of psychopaths in this room.
Yep. Anyways, detour.
Fun things you hear in a jiu-jitsu school. So yeah, boundaries, right?
Boundaries, yeah. Boundaries. Let's not do that in person. Don't pull somebody in your guard, even if you like jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. And I want people to understand this too about boundaries, is boundaries work both ways. They're both good and bad. Boundaries can protect you against painful experiences or negative people, in sense, like, think of it as terms of just keeping the bad out of your life. But boundaries can also trap the bad in. You can set up boundaries, we kind of refer to them as, we set up our walls, our little barriers. And basically what we're saying is we keep the bad in. Instead of keeping it out, we're now keeping it in. So whatever boundaries you set sometimes can come from a place where you might naturally need safety and a sense of protection. But sometimes they can be used as a way to kind of shield ourselves from growing and developing. And it's a way for us to kind of stay trapped in our own negative place. So you want to be careful with what boundaries actually exist. And just kind of think about it in those terms, because not every boundary is good and not every boundary is bad. You really want to start to weigh it and do pros and cons with it.
And that would probably go back to the Thinking Error podcast, where, if you have maybe some, say you really engage in some black and white thinking, which is, again, really, really common, you might be setting up boundaries that you think might be useful, but actually they're really harmful. Mm-hmm. Or you're always like wondering, well, why can't I find myself in a romantic relationship that's like thriving? Well, some boundaries are really important, right? If you don't have any boundaries, you're going to get walked all over. But if you have too many boundaries, then somebody can't even make a step towards that, right? And then you're left wondering, well, why is this? And it's like, well, maybe we need to reevaluate. Again, like you said, some of these boundaries aren't as useful mm-hmm. for your life. And I think it's really important to kind of update those, yes. right? Because at one point in your life, you might need to set some harsher boundaries because mm-hmm. Say there's, you're really sick, or somebody in your family is really sick, or some just tragedy happened. You're not going to have the bandwidth to be your normal self in other situations. So you might have to set a boundary like, these are the things that I'm doing, and then I can't even think about taking on anything else.
Right.
Whether that's work related, whether that's like friend related, whether that's whatever it might be. I can't think of, I don't want to say one thing because it's not, I don't have the exact situation I'm trying to share, but there are certain times where you're like, I can't do anything else. This is all that I can give my effort to. And then when that's over though, when you've gotten through that, maybe then it's time to reevaluate, all right, let me be a little bit more open to this, or let me go try and do this. So constantly evaluating those things, especially on a personal level, I think is really important. But particularly too with work, mm-hmm. people really, really struggle with boundaries with work. I think if you're really inclined to work hard and work a lot, right, and you want to progress, or you want to take on new clients, or you want to build your business, or you want to get a promotion, whatever it is that you're trying to do, it can be really easy to be like, well, this is all I'm focusing on, and now I'm not going to do anything else, mm-hmm. right? And it's really easy to ignore other stuff in your life and let that boundary kind of seep over. Especially, like I said, right now, a lot of people are working in very different capacities than they used to work.
Right.
Maybe you used to travel all the time for work, so that would be a way that like you were going out and doing things, and now you're not doing that at all. So now your boss is like, oh, okay, you're not traveling, so can you do like these 17 other things? And you're like, whoa, like I can do like 3 more, or you're just somebody who, because now the reins have been taken off for, not staying at your office all night, like you might not have stayed at your office until 9 p.m. You would have left, but now that it's your home office, you're like, oh, I'll grab dinner, I'll talk to my, spouse for 5 minutes, and then I'll go back and keep working. And that's something that, I think that there's certain periods of time in your life where you have to say, hey, I'm setting this work goal, and I'm going to devote, the next X amount of months, year, whatever it might be for you, that you need to move forward. And then everything else is going to kind of be more, off boundaries. But there has to be an end to that, and there has to be a plan, and not just you've haphazardly dipped into it without even realizing it, and now you're doing that, and you're like, whoa, why do I feel so burnt out? And you're like, it's because you don't have any boundaries. Like, you're literally not, like, you're not removing yourself, whether that's physically or like mentally, you're not shutting down. And there was a podcast I listened to with that guy, his name's Guy, I can't remember, he's a psychologist. Anyways, he was talking about how people, like he was, he had been studying for all these years, he got his, bachelor's, master's, PhD, doing all this stuff, like he was convinced this is what he wanted to do, and then like a year into working, like being a therapist, he was like, I am so burnt out. And he was like, why am I so burnt out? Like, am I working with too many clients? Like, and then he was like, no, I'm not. I don't stop thinking about it when I leave. Like, I'm literally ruminating over all of these problems, and I leave the office and my client work is done, but I'm still continuing to think about it. And this is really, really common in businesses where you're dealing with other people. Like, obviously, if you're a therapist, or even if you're a coach, this is something that's really, really common that I've dealt with, other coaches on my team have dealt with, and if you're listening and you're a coach, you've most likely dealt with too. Because you're working with individuals, and typically you're working with individuals through really hard problems. So you want to be this person who is helping them, but you can't help but think about it afterwards, right? Or if you don't have something in place to stop you from doing that, you can just ruminate on these things. Again, negativity bias. You have all these clients who are doing really, really great, and then you have 2 clients who had a bad week, and that's all you can think about. And then it's ruining the rest of your week. And now you're being an ineffective coach. So how do you stop that? There has to be something where you say, okay, I'm, mentally the switch is flipping to where, okay, for most coaches, you can work wherever. So it's not really a physical location, but it might have to be like a shutdown routine. I got that like from Cal Newport. He does something like a little bit elaborate. Like, he literally turns off his laptop and he's like, I'm shutting down. Or he does something like that where he like shuts it and he says it out loud. And like, that's how he stops it. So maybe you need to do that, or maybe you need to like sandwich some kind of activity that like gets your mind off of it. Like, hey, when I'm done with work, I'm gonna go cook a meal, or I'm gonna go for a walk, or I'm gonna put on a song, or I'm gonna go do something that I enjoy that maybe it's just like a few minutes. But now when you're done with that, you're most likely not just like you're not like shutting the laptop off and then like scrolling through your phone and like, man, you're thinking about it, and then it's 2 hours later and you're like, holy shit, I've still been thinking about the same problem, or it's been, occupying space in your mind, and no wonder you feel burnt out.
Right. Yeah, I had a professor who used to call them living room people. It's the people that you take from your office and you bring them into your living room with you, and you're sitting there watching TV, but you're not watching TV, you're not reading the book, you're actually thinking about your client, you're thinking about those things. And so if you don't turn that off, if you can't compartmentalize to some degree, you're really going to struggle with that, because there's no reprieve from it. You're constantly bombarded by other people's problems and issues. As a therapist, that is definitely a real thing. Like, compassion fatigue is a real thing. And so
I would say first responders, this is something that they deal with in a different way, because a lot of times
they take the trauma home with them.
Yeah, they're taking the trauma home. Or if they're, in the military, you're taking, again, that's going to be some kind of trauma. If you're working in a hospital, so there's a lot of different ways that this can show up in your life. And those people generally are always like, hey, don't take work home with you. Literally like physically change out of your uniform before you come home, if that's what you need to do, because you walk in the door and you're no longer that person. And it's not that you're not dealing with it, because some people certainly do that. Some people certainly just become so dead inside that they no longer can operate and feel anything. So you don't want to do that, but you also don't want to bring home, the 3 car crashes that you saw and the person who died. Like, you don't want to bring that energy into the home.
And to some degree, you're a human being, so some of that's going to happen. Like, that transference is going to occur. But on a by and large, a day-to-day basis, we want to do our best to safeguard against that. Like, yeah, if you're a paramedic, you know, and you come up on a horrible car accident, like that's going to happen. If you're a police officer and you show up and, you know, a baby's been killed, you know what I mean? Like, these are things that are going to be extremely traumatic, and you're not going to shake that out of your head. You know, I mean, for us, like, for the people who don't know, I also work in a prison. I work with violent and high-risk offenders. Like, I've seen some really awful things that happen inside prison systems, to guards, to safety people, to other inmates. And it's kind of like, okay, you know, what has become normal and acceptable in my life is certainly not society's version of normal and acceptable, and I have to check that, you know, and I don't want to bring that home with me. So setting up boundaries is incredibly important, and I think there are two things that I want people to understand, and this is what also makes boundaries really scary, especially when it comes to relationships, is that when we set a boundary, we also risk losing the relationship. And that's terrifying for people, especially depending on who that relationship is. Especially if you're a little bit older and now it's your mom or your dad that you need to reset a boundary with, or if it's your brother or sister, or if it's your husband or wife, or if it's your boyfriend or girlfriend, or if it's your son or daughter, the people you work with. When you risk losing the relationship, it takes on a new meaning and value and importance in your life. And so you really want to be careful, and that's what can inhibit people from making boundaries and establishing them. But in not establishing them, the flip side of that coin comes true, and that is we basically can remain prisoners to other people's wishes and demands if we don't set those boundaries. And so it's a balancing act. It's the space between how do I lose myself and find myself at the same time. And it's hard. And sometimes, you guys, you can't have it both ways. There's a little parable that I tell my clients. It's two frogs and an alligator.
Which client? I'm like, is this going to be a socially acceptable story?
It is. I promise. It'll be socially acceptable. So we have two frogs sitting in a tree on a branch next to a river, and they're friends and they're talking. And floating down the river comes this alligator. And the alligator stops, he looks up, and he starts talking to the two frogs. And they're all talking, and they're all having a great time, and everybody's getting along wonderfully. One of the frogs jumps out of the tree and he hops up to the riverbed, and he looks at the alligator, and the alligator says, "What's wrong?" And he says, I'm afraid that if I cross the river, you're going to eat me." And the alligator says, "You have nothing to be afraid of. You can cross. You'll be fine." So the frog starts jumping across the river, and the alligator comes out of the water and snatches the frog and he eats him. And the other frog is still sitting in the tree, and he's like, "What the hell? Why did you do that? You gave him your word." And he said, "Yeah, but I'm an alligator." And I use that kind of story to identify, all right, this is the importance of boundaries. And that sometimes up to a certain point, you can trust certain people. Beyond that point, as much as you may want to, you know you can't, because they can't change the nature of who they are. So if you have an alcoholic mother, if you have an abusive father, if you have somebody who has hurt you in the past, this is where we want, and we're going to get into owning our own thoughts and thinking about that kind of stuff. But being honest with ourselves and saying, all right, what is the limit to which I can actually trust this person, and setting the boundary? Because the problem with it becomes is I want you to be something that you're not. And so in doing that, I ignore what keeps me safe, what the warning signs are, the red flags. And so I ignore those things, and I victimize myself by jumping into the river with the alligator. And I know I can't trust you that way. And so while it hurts and it's painful, the adjustment is going to be on you, because I cannot control that other person. No matter how badly I want to, I can't control them. And so the idea of boundaries is learning to keep yourself safe. And if you can't, and we're going to get into detaching and detaching with love and detaching with anger, what it means to actually set some of those boundaries and when to evaluate whether or not the relationship just isn't good in your life. So I use that as a way to kind of demonstrate. And I've had clients come back and they're like, yeah, that person's an alligator. Like, I can only love them up to this point.
And that's really hard, especially, like you said, as you get older, and these are really meaningful relationships, you know? And I think that there's a hard line, because I think some people will not hear you, but hear kind of like popular kind of, I don't know what we call it, popular psychology, right? Like,
pop psychology.
Is that a thing?
Sure, yeah.
And it's like, you know, you have to just, you know, do you know, set up your boundaries, like, you know, you can only control yourself, kind of a thing. And that's just shutting people, like, that's giving the suggestion to just shut somebody out of your life without trying to make adjustments, right? And then that's putting blame on everybody else too, because you're also part of this equation too, right?
Right.
So I think that sometimes that message can be like, yeah, just fuck everybody else, just do you. And it's like, well, that can be damaging also, but up to a certain, right? Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I think that obviously, as everything, when you're like on the extreme ends, just super trusting people or super blocking people out and having too many boundaries,
yes,
they're both equally detrimental. So I think that you have to actually do real work to understand, okay, what am I bringing to this relationship? What boundaries am I setting? And are they boundaries that like I can actually go through with this other person, because it's not just you, it's the other person too. Right. So like you said, if you have an alcoholic mother who like, you're trying to have this relationship, but like you always get burned and then you're always left like, man, but if you up to a certain point, you can kind of toe that line and you're like, all right, I can see this person this much, or I can spend this much time together and it's great. After a certain point, it always goes downhill.
Right.
Well, kind of learn to push that and then go, okay, here's the relationship that I can have. And then this is just too much.
Right.
And, that can be fulfilling. It might be better than just completely ignoring your mom altogether, right? Because that's detrimental in its own way. And this could be for any situation. But
we're just using mom as an example.
Yeah. No hate on moms. But just, anybody.
Love you, mom.
Yeah.
She does listen to these.
You're crazy, but yeah, no, really, you're crazy. I love you though. But it is so challenging, especially when it is a relationship that's been going on for so long, or somebody is abusive, right? Like that's a whole different thing, and you're like, well, maybe I should just trust them, and then it's like, man, like every time, then it's like, all right, that's a situation that is harming you in multiple different ways. That's a situation where it's like, no matter what I really do, like if this person isn't changing and I'm putting myself in harm's way.
Right.
So I need to just exit this.
Yeah.
It's a hard boundary though for people who have been in that cycle, especially if it's been happening like if it is like a family member, it's been happening your whole life. It doesn't just feel like you can just be like, okay, bye. Like clearly you would have done that before. Like there's just so much involved there.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's a sliding scale depending on who we're talking about. You start a relationship or you start a new job. Your boundaries in the beginning of a relationship and when you start a job are very clear, right? You sign a contract with the new employment and they're like, these are your job duties. This is what you're going to do. And you start a relationship with somebody new and you're like, this is who we are. This is like us. You find yourself 4 or 5 years into your new job and your role completely changes. They're like, oh yeah, we need you to do this now. And this department shut down, so this is now your responsibility. Well, that's not what I signed on for. Same thing. Who you were in the beginning of a relationship, you get 4 or 5 years into a relationship and it looks completely different. Your boundaries are completely different. Things have changed. You live together, you've grown together, you've done different things, you've had experiences that shaped who you are. Same thing. So boundaries are constantly evolving, and the ones that are the most difficult to set are the ones that we love and have a vested interest the most. And so when it comes to parents and significant others and children that we want to protect from iPads and cell phones, like it's difficult to do these things because we know what's in the best interest, but it's not what our heart wants us to do. And so there's the duality of the situation and what makes it so painful for people to do, especially when I can risk losing this person. And as a parent, by the way, you're not going to lose your children by setting boundaries. In fact, what you will do is you will reinforce the fact that you love and care about them, because people who don't provide discipline and they don't provide boundaries. And so obviously there's a balance between discipline. But what I'm saying is the people that you love, you exist within boundaries. You don't exist boundaryless. That's not love. That isn't freedom even. So it's the idea of understanding, all right, where do these things start and stop, and how will they actually benefit me?
And I would imagine as a kid, if you had a parent who didn't set any boundaries or didn't follow through with certain things that they said that they were going to do, that would be really confusing.
Yes.
Right? Like as a kid, you would grow up and be like, wait, well, obviously it depends on the age of the child, but even if they're young, maybe they don't know the exact mechanism behind what's happening, but they know, okay, well, mom said this or dad said this, and then they did something different, or they didn't, like, so why am I going to listen to them for anything, or why would I trust them for anything if this didn't happen or this didn't go through? And I could just imagine that would be really chaotic for a kid growing up.
I work with prisoners, and so they're coming from environments where they have no rules, no discipline, no boundaries, and so their initial experience in prison sometimes is like horrible for them because there's nothing but rules and boundaries, right? we're going to stay away from like the crazy prison rules, but we're going to look at like the structure of it. And so a lot of them, like they get a year or two into some of their sentences and they're like, this is better. Like for the first time I have structure in my life. And
It's so sad.
you have to like sit back and be like, oh my God, this person's learning about structure in prison. And so that is, there's a window into my life with the people that I work with outside of my private practice. I'm so grateful for those clients and for the people that listen to this, because you guys are on just a different level. But you see very quickly where no boundaries, where no discipline, where that leads. And so these things they're not harmful, they're helpful.
And to go back to tie the last podcast in, which was about social media and screen time and all that, setting boundaries for that for yourself, and also if you do have a family, with your family, is so incredibly important. A lot of the experts, I guess, in this field, there seems to be and this is still new and emerging research, because honestly, this is so new. I mean, it's been going on for a while now, but the way that research works, it doesn't just happen overnight. You're like, oh, okay, we have all this data that we can just pull from, and these meta-analyses and all these things. It just takes a lot of time for the research to catch up. But they've seemed to identify that under 2 hours of screen time, and that's all screens, that's TV, that's iPad, that's phone, that's every screen, seems to be not too harmful. That's for at least the last that I heard. This could be updated, I don't know. But under 2 hours total seems to be less of an issue. And then every hour that you go above that, there seems to be more and more problems. And, somebody might go, 2 hours, that's a lot. It's not. If a kid is watching a TV show and then they're watching a YouTube video and then they play a game, that could be 2 hours. You know what I mean?
2 episodes of Paw Patrol is an hour.
Yeah, okay, so there we go.
There you go.
You're already halfway through, and think about how many people, kids just sit in front of a TV all day, right? Or now not as much the TV, but more, maybe the TV's hooked up to YouTube, and then or whatever. There could be 18 fucking screens going on. So setting some kind of boundary as far as time is really useful. You can do this on a lot of the apps, like on Instagram. You can set a reminder. It doesn't shut it down, but I think that there is actually a way that you can shut it down. But there's, you can set a reminder. Hey, at an hour or 2 hours, send me a little notification. It says, okay, you've been on here for this much time. All right. You can set something. It's where is it on the phone? I think it's under one of the screen. It's in settings. And basically, you can shut the apps down, or certain apps down, for certain times. So I have that on, and it keeps all of the main ones. It keeps your map and your phone calls and stuff like that. Your phone isn't shut down. It's not do not disturb mode. But when you go and you click on the app, it says 1 minute, 15 minutes, or release the limit for the day. So it takes a step. So sometimes you'll just go and click on it, and you're like, I don't really need this. Or 15 more minutes and then I'll put it away, or whatever. But it has some kind of a stopping mechanism there that you can do. And I think that it's just whatever the rules that you decide to set for yourself and with your family, I think it's really important. And another one that they've identified that's really, really useful, which again, no brainer, is not having the phones in the bedroom. And I think that that's something that, again, a lot of people I know my age really struggle with, because I've used that as my alarm for so long. It's just, honestly though, fuck Apple's alarm. I want to get a new fucking alarm just because the new set of phone, I don't know if it's the phones or the updates, but the new alarm is so awful. It's so loud. Even I have it literally the volume all the way down, but God forbid I don't. It sounds like a fucking siren, and I'm just Jesus Christ, I could not be in a worse mood now. So, one thing that people can do is get an actual alarm, an alarm clock. I don't use Alexa and all that shit, but I guess if you have an Alexa, it has an alarm presumably on there too. And then just have the phone out of the room, have it charging in another room to where it's actually you have to go up and get it. And if it's across the house, you're way less likely to wake up, grab it, come in bed, and then scroll, right? You're probably not gonna do that. But if it's right next to your bed,
it's at least an extra step.
It's an extra step.
Yeah.
And especially for the kids, right? If you're letting the devices in their bedroom, they're going to be on it. Like, I think Rogan did a podcast with the guy Tristan who made The Social Dilemma, and he was saying how his something about, like, and I'm gonna fuck the story, but it was something about like his daughter. They got her like a Fitbit, and because she just thought it was like cool, and I think it was like his younger daughter, and they like looked at the sleep stuff. And it was like horrible because she was like checking it and like all this stuff and like looking at stuff. I don't know if all the ins and outs. Like, did she have an iPad? And I don't know.
Right.
But it was like, oh my gosh, like this is like don't have that, you know. So whatever it might be, and I know a lot of people struggle with sleep. You know, a lot of people do struggle with like waking up in the middle of the night. But the worst thing that you can do is when you wake up is to grab your phone. First of all, the light is now completely throwing off your circadian rhythm. You're getting light at a time that you should not be getting light, and now you're setting your clock back to, and then it's like you basically create jet lag for yourself when you view light when you shouldn't. It's really, really interesting. And I'm still learning so much about this, so I don't want to do a podcast on it yet and sound unintelligent, but go check out Dr. Huberman's podcast. They're amazing. He talks all about this, and it's so funny because I've done that, and so many people have done that, and like you're literally creating jet lag because you're now viewing light at times that you shouldn't be, and you're pushing your clock back, and you're all over the place, and you wake up, and everybody can relate to this. You wake up, and if you've looked at your phone too late, you wake up and you're like, God, like I just feel like out of it. I feel tired, my eyes feel heavy, like I've slept all night, but like I just, you know, feel off. So setting some kind of parameters, again, for yourself, and if you do have a family, for your family, is going to be really important. And discussing these things, you know, obviously age-appropriate conversations. If your child is 5, they're not going to understand, like, so we're doing this so that you don't, you know, self-harm yourself. In fact, like, they're not going to understand that. So, you know, if the kid is older, you'll be able to have a conversation like that. But explain to them why you're doing it, in an age-appropriate conversation, and explain and set up other things for them to do. Don't just take the iPad away and be like, oh, just stare at the wall. Like, no, they need to have something else that they can.
You need to replace the activity with something.
Yeah.
And they need to give them time to adjust. There's going to be a natural resistance to change. And once that resistance, you know, works its way through, it usually resolves itself, and they're not craving an iPad, they're not craving the television or any of those things, because they now know how to go engage and play. They can play with Play-Doh, they can, you know, color, they can go outside and ride their bike, they can actually do other things to develop and grow as a person.
I would say that it's probably a little bit harder when kids are really young, just because you can only put them in so many situations, right? But as they get older, you know, I would imagine like 5 and above, like they can start doing like sports, like even if it's not with school,
sure,
you know, they can be put into situations. And I mean, I guess even younger, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know kids, but you can start doing things like they can do after school activities, like they can be part of like sports leagues, like they can go do martial arts, they can go do all these things, and then they're not like asking for an iPad because like they're excited to go do whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah, and I was actually gonna talk about that when we kind of got to a space like toward the end, but like some skills to kind of help and set boundaries, obviously when it comes to iPads and all that kind of stuff, is, you know, look for things like the Space app, you know, scroll 66 apps down and download it. Set time limits, use filters, use lockouts. I know one of my friends that I work with, she has Instagram set up for an hour a day, and it locks the app.
Okay, so it does have that. Is that on the phone or is that an app?
I could ask her and let you know. We could bring it up next one. But I also tell people, if you're really looking to kind of change and break these habits, you want to start approaching them the same way I tell people to start approaching actual addiction, which is through mindfulness activities. What I mean by that is this: I don't just mean like sitting in a room quiet with nothing to do, paying attention to what's going on in your inner spirit.
That's my favorite thing to do.
Is find an activity that you can do without your phone. So for me, this is why I use jiu-jitsu. Once upon a time, if you had contacted me 10 years ago, I would have said, oh, I'm training jiu-jitsu because I want to go be a world champion. I train jiu-jitsu now because it's the one time in the one space throughout the day that I'm disconnected from everyone and everything except the person in front of me who's trying to choke me or break my arm. That's it. There's no phones, there's no what bills do I have to pay, there's no problems, there's no issues. The only thing I can do is that. So find things like playing sports or doing yoga or jiu-jitsu or any activity like creating and doing art where you're drawing or creating a vase or sculpture or something. Turn off your notifications. Delete some of the apps that you don't really need. Do you need Instagram and Facebook? Like, no. Do you need Twitter and Reddit? Probably not. So it's kind of like you can start to limit it, and, you know, the guys who created this stuff, they'll all tell you that willpower is like the first thing to go. They themselves don't want to check Pinterest and all these other things, but they come home and they're addicted to it. So to treat it like an addiction and to start actually like doing things to address it, those are boundaries, those are limits, and those are things that you can do from a social media perspective at least.
Yeah, I think the screen time is so important, again, for kids in particular, but adults too. You know, we all find ourselves, it's really easy to fall into bad habits. And me and Sam actually talked about this on our last podcast when we were talking about adherence through adversity and different things. And you know, when a lot of things are going on, a lot of people want to just fall into their bad habits, and it makes sense because it's easy. So if we don't put safeguards up, or we don't put goals, or we don't sandwich activities in there, like, you're going to do your bad habits. You're going to sit on the couch, you're going to scroll, you're going to play video games, you're going to binge watch stuff. Like, it's in human nature. Like, it's like Jordan Peterson always says, like, it's surprising that we're not all like addicted to everything, or that we're all not doing these terrible things, because really, like, it's so easy. So there has to be something that says, you know, nobody, like me and you and everybody here, well, there's nobody here right now, but other people in the office,
our studio audience,
everybody can fall prey to this. So we all have to set up things that say, okay, how do we stop? And you know, there's so many ways that we can do this, and you just have to figure out what we're like, because what I struggle with might not be what you struggle with.
Exactly.
Because I struggle with the fact that I have to share on certain social media platforms for my online business. And I know a lot of people listening here do the same thing. So what do? You can't just delete it. That would be amazing. And some people can't. Some people have the luxury that their business does not rely on that, and that's totally cool. They have other outlets that they use. But for everybody who does use social media in a more educational / business thing, like if you're a knowledge-based worker, it's going to make sense to use this, but how do you automate it? You know, and you need to figure out, what is it? Do you have a problem picking up your phone and scrolling? Do you need to say, okay, I'm pre-writing my caption in the Notes app, which is far less distracting than anything else. So I'm pre-writing a caption, and then I already know what picture I'm going to have, and then I'm going to set a time where I'm going to post it, and I'm going to set a time where I'm going to check the comments, and then I'm going to set a time where I share this other thing. And of course, you know, like, we're not all robots, you know, you can't just time block everything in your life. You know, you have to, there's going to be some times where you're just scrolling, there's going to be times where you share things spontaneously, and that's okay. But the majority of the time, for like the bulk of the work, which will, you know, sharing stuff, commenting, etc., you know, set times for that. Like you would set time for anything else. Like if you want to read a book, you're probably not just going to like accidentally read a book. Most people aren't, you know, I mean, unless you have nothing else going on.
You have to be purposeful with your behaviors.
Yeah, okay, when I come home, or when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to read 10 pages. I tell this with clients all the time for training. If you're finding yourself putting off training, you need to say, you know, set aside the schedule for the week. It's Sunday. Okay, I'm going to work out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Because guess what happens? If you don't have that and you say, I'm going to work out 4 times, even I've been lifting for 12 fucking years, and I do this sometimes. I said, I'm going to train on a Monday. Things get really busy. I'll just do it tomorrow. And then what ends up happening? Oh, well, I'm really busy today too. And then there's always never seems to be enough time. And then you're 2 sessions behind. And then you're like, how did I end up here? Why is it Thursday and I haven't even worked out yet? This happens to every single person. So we have to be intentional with what we're setting. So whether it's training goals, whether it's screen time, you know, whether it's I want to do this new activity, you have to be intentional with it. And again, set boundaries for yourself to not fall into these other behaviors. And it's really interesting. I think everybody can probably relate to this. The busier you are, the less bullshit that you do, right? Like, I mean, really, how many times in our lives have we been really, really busy, like productively busy, not just, you know, busy. And then you're like, wow, and you think back, like, how did I do all that? But you actually, it like feeds upon each other. You know, when you have 4 things that are pretty important that you have to do and time sensitive that day, then you get them done. So you have to recreate that urgency or that discipline in some way so that you can actually be productive on the other days in a normal week. You know, not every week is going to be like, wow, my back's against the wall, like I have to get all these projects done. It's just not. So, okay, well, how do I create this urgency to actually be productive, not just during these like high stress weeks, but I want to actually start reading more. I want to like do a sport. I want to do something creative. You have to carve out the time and set it aside and set up those boundaries so that you know, okay, for this hour or these 2 hours, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not focusing. That's like probably my favorite part about jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of things I like about it, but that where you're just literally only focusing on that one thing and nothing else matters. And people,
that's mindfulness.
People are like, oh, like, you know, I love that you're doing this. It'd be so cool if you could share some training. And I'm like, no, sorry. First of all, don't watch my training. It sucks. Second of all, I don't want to think about a phone. I don't want to set up a camera. I don't want to think about that whole like part of my life. I walk in and I see everybody there and we do our stuff. Like, it has nothing to do with the rest of my life. You know what I mean? And I love that. And it's so nice to be able to do that. And yeah, some people are really good at meditating. Some people are really, like, they love going to yoga. You know, I'm not as good at that kind of stuff. I'm trying. It's hard. But some people that comes really, really naturally to them. Like, that fits their personality and they can go to yoga and they feel relaxed. I feel competitive when I go to yoga. I'm like, okay, I want to do this pose better. I want to hold it for longer. Fuck these other people. I can do this. Even when I'm not, like, good at it, I'm like, it's like, okay, this is, like, completely defeating the purpose. Like, stop. But there's certain activities where it's like, okay, like, you know, for us, it would be jujitsu. Other times, like, the sauna is a great example. Like, you're sitting in there and, like, yeah, you're, like, kind of trapped with your thoughts, but then, like, you're just, like, sweating and you're hot and everything kind of just, like, melts because you're, like,
you're relaxed.
Can't really focus on anything else.
You don't have your phone with you in the sauna.
Well, I do. I will. I was going when before I got sick. I started going back to the gym a few times a week because I really do like the sauna. And I would use it with my guided meditation. I would do it in there. So I wasn't scrolling. I was actually on there doing my little guided meditation. Which, shout out to Sam Harris. I will say that I do love his app. Called Waking Up. I've started and stopped this, like, fucking intro course because they try to tell you to do this intro course before you do like the daily ones, because again, that kind of makes sense. And because I'm a psycho, every time that I've stopped it, I, like, go back and start from the first one because I'm like, well, I'm not gonna, like, I need to, like, restart it. So I'm fucking gonna get through these first 30. I'm only on, like, 15, but it's fine. And I'll, like, skip days and stuff, but I'm trying to be better with it. And I will say it's a really good app, and it's not too, like, fluffy. And if anybody's ever heard Sam Harris talk, like, he's very, like, calculated and, like, methodical, and he's not like, so get in touch with the spirit goddess. Like, it's not like that. Like, it's just, like, it's about mindfulness, it's about meditation, but it kind of suits what I like. And I think what a lot of people don't like about meditation stuff, or at least me, I'm just like, it just feels too, like, out there for me. So he does a really good job of packaging that in an app. So if you guys are interested and you need a guided meditation, suggest it.
Yeah, a couple of things that I just want to get into.
Like, stop talking about your stupid app.
Before we run out of too much time. So I brought it up earlier.
The batteries died.
Detaching with love and detaching with anger. When we're setting boundaries, sometimes we identify really toxic relationships in our life that we need to cut out. And there's various ways to do that. Sometimes the idea of just detaching means letting go of that person. There's nothing that you can do about it. There's nothing that you can do to change it, but you just have to kind of stop and cut contact off. Other times you can detach with love, and detaching with love is a little bit more difficult because it's you're basically saying, look, I know that I love this person, I know what I'm capable of, and I know what they're capable of, and I don't have to hate them to let go of them. Other times we're going to detach with anger. You know, we know that the person is harmful, they're toxic, but detaching in life is a normal, healthy product. It's a boundary that we want to set. But you really want to make sure it's obviously with a person that you need that for. You're basically saying, look, I'm removing you from my life. I have to, for whatever the reasons are. And those reasons might be really important to you because it keeps you safe, it keeps you healthy, it prevents you from being hurt. And so what I'm saying is one of the things that I see a lot with my clients who come in and struggle with setting boundaries is the toxic relationships that exist in their life and how difficult it is in letting go. And so what I really want to do is normalize that process for any of the listeners right now who are like, I don't know whether or not I should keep this person in my life. You need to get to the space where you can make the decision, where you know, like, all right, I know for a fact, and then take it that extra step and work on the detachment. But I know how difficult that is for people to do. And it is never easy, and you'll have second guesses throughout most of your life about it, but it's just going to be a product that helps keep you safe. So I wanted to at least throw that in there for people who I know who might be listening to this and actually are dealing with that right now. You are not alone. You're not the only person who's dealt with this, and it is incredibly difficult, so give yourself a break.
Yeah, when we're talking about setting up boundaries and, seeing, like, if somebody is harming you, like, these are, like, there's certain clear-cut things that it's like, you need to immediately remove yourself from the situation. Like, it's still going to be hard, but there are certain things that, like, aren't going to be, you can't really work through.
Right.
Or you shouldn't work through because it's not going to be beneficial. And then there's other situations where it's like, all right, both people can kind of set boundaries and grow and learn from this, as long as you're not in a harmful situation.
Right.
So I think looking at it through that lens, like, first and foremost, like, is this, like, physically or, like, really emotionally harming me? Like, that's where you need to go, okay, I'm separating myself from this person. Or is it something that's just kind of like, there's some normal ups and downs and I need to set, like, healthier boundaries, and, like, we both need to just communicate more. So I think that is kind of the lens to look through it. And of course, if you're dealing with this, I highly recommend seeing a therapist. Like, this is not just something that you should probably work through by yourself. And you might be able to, depending on the severity, but most likely it would be useful to do this kind of work with a therapist. And clearly we both support that for people. Something where it's like, all right, I've been working a lot more, and my boss doesn't understand me. Like, maybe that's just like a conversation or a meeting. You might not need to go to therapy for that. Maybe you do. You totally might, because you don't maybe have the tools or know how to use your voice. And that could be something that's a pervasive theme in your whole life. Cool. Sometimes it's just a matter of, like, like, I need to write down a list of, like, the things that I'm struggling with, bring this up to them in a normal conversation, and then we can move forward. So it's really just going to depend, but especially with, like, toxic interpersonal relationships, like, that's generally, I would say, probably harder for people
it is
to do on their own.
It's difficult, and that's what the emotional pull to it, and understanding, like, I've lived my life with this person, or they've been there for so long, and it's like, now I'm going to get rid of them, and what's my life going to look like? And so it becomes this really difficult space to examine what that looks like. And even when you do, you still have to do it. And it's hard because now your life looks different. And so it's never an easy thing. And so that's where I think sometimes the benefit of a therapist does come in, because they have no vested interest in your life. And so it's kind of like, it's a sounding board that is for your benefit. But even then, even my clients, I always try and do my best to paint, like, a whole picture, and I'll do my best, because when I hear them, like, backpedaling on something, or they're using a thinking error to justify this or do that, I'm kind of like, well, that's not what you said before, and so it gives you that opportunity to be more honest and somebody to help kind of keep you in that. And sometimes people decide to do it, and other times they don't. It's not up to me to make the decision for you, because I don't have to live with the consequences of it. You do. But I want to make sure that you at least know everything as clearly as you possibly can. Just a couple of things that I do want to touch on about understanding boundaries and understanding yourself. Number one, you have to start owning your own thoughts. And what I mean by that is to use the phrase, you have to be thinking about what you're thinking. You have to be I don't want to use have to, right? I want you to start questioning what you're listening to and what is shaping your opinions of things. All too often we ingest the opinions of other people, and we adopt those opinions into our life without ever questioning them. And we start implementing these ideas and they shape our life, but it's not an idea that we actually came to. Fortunately in my life, I grew up with really balanced people who always made me look at both sides of things. I have an uncle who was in real estate, and I remember him telling me a story about how one of his tenants, like, did some damage to a property, and his first instinct was to, like, I'm gonna go sue this bastard, and I'm gonna track him down, and I'm gonna get him, and it was like $3,000 worth of damage. But his business partner, who's a little bit, more like a legal guy, was like, well, hold on a minute, let's take a look at this. And he, like, worked up some numbers, and he's like, well, it's gonna take 1.5 years, and it's gonna cost us $5,000 to recuperate the $3,000. So do we really wanna do this? And he put himself in check, and he was like, nope, that's stupid, that doesn't make any sense, and he moved on. But I've always had examples of that. My mom was always like, well, if you do this, think about how it's going to affect somebody else. Maybe that's why I'm a therapist, because I've had those experiences throughout life. But I'm always thinking about what I'm thinking, and I'm trying to see it from both perspectives. If I read one thing where somebody's like, this is the greatest thing ever, I always try and find somebody else who's saying it's the worst thing ever, because I want to make up my own mind. And I want it to be about me and what I choose. The second thing is, and this is the part that kills me, you have to be willing to grow your own knowledge base. bothers me when I see people graduate. It bothers me when I see people who have reached a certain point in their careers or their professional lives or as parents or whatever, and they're like, oh yeah, I've done it, I know everything. You don't. Society is changing, new research is coming out, things are developing. Like, constantly challenge yourself to know more. By understanding the world around you, you are understanding on a deeper level yourself, and you're learning about yourself. You're learning what boundaries you want and why. And the second thing is this, and this is probably the most difficult for people to understand and to get past. You have to clarify distorted thinking. We did a whole podcast on thinking errors, but the reality is we have a tendency to not see things clearly. We think and perceive in really distorted ways. Probably the easiest distortions to notice are in personal relationships. We rarely see people for who they are, and our perceptions distorted by our own past experiences, our own preoccupations with what we want, and who we think that they are. And it happens sometimes with the people that we know best. And so this is where I always say people, is this who they are, or is this who you want them to be? Who did you want them to be is a little bit easier to ask ourselves versus the reality of what they are. And I'm not saying there's an expectation of like an impossible limit that somebody could ever live up to. But it's kind of like, all right, what's your expectation and what did you really want versus what they're really giving you? And do those things match up? And are they capable of these expectations? And so that's the hardest part. And it's getting through the thinking errors that justify it. It's getting through understanding like, how have I grown in this space? It's getting to a space where I'm paying attention to what I'm thinking. All of those things combined help you understand yourself on a deeper level, and it helps you move to set boundaries that actually exist to benefit you, rather than it being, some willy-nilly thing that you read on a 1-minute article where somebody's like, oh, if you do this with this, you'll get this benefit. It's like, good luck. Call me when it fails, all right? Because it's not something you thought of. Somebody just threw it out there and they said, oh, hey, go do this. Like, find what works for you. I mean, jiu-jitsu, out of all those lists, that's the thing that worked for me. So find the time, do some of the research for yourself and figure out what works for you. But those are 3 important steps. Yeah,
setting boundaries could not be more important in really every kind of situation. And if you don't, you're going to have some kind of negative effects. Mm-hmm. There's nobody who isn't affected by it when they don't set them, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like there's certain things in life that if you decide not to do them, like, it doesn't really affect you one way or the other, right? Like, maybe your life isn't as good or it could be better, but it doesn't really, it's really no issue. This is something that is going to be a problem with everything. It's going to be a problem with your relationships, with your significant others, with your kids, with your family, with your work, with what you want out of life. Like, there's so many, it hits every single facet. So if you just kind of ignore it, and I think a lot of people do that because it's easier. You know, like, we've all done that. You know what I mean? And you can't fix every boundary. Like, you can't be like, oh, listen to this podcast and I'm going to fix every single boundary tomorrow. Like, whoa, let's do one at a time, right? Like, if let's pick the worst.
Prioritize.
Mm-hmm. Prioritize and execute, guys. It's pretty much the rule of thumb for life. But pick what is the most harmful for me, mm-hmm. and then kind of work down that list. Because if you try to change everything at once, it's just going to fail.
You said something that made me think of this, and it's a skill, it's a little technique that I want to teach you guys for people who have a hard time setting boundaries immediately. Like, there might come a point in time where when you have the ability and the time and space to sit down and think about things and write your pro-con list and do all that kind of stuff, it's really easy to find the boundary there. Because you're not being pressured. But sometimes a boundary needs to be set in the moment. And this is also where I see people struggle, because they say yes when they mean no. Or they mean no, but they say yes. And so they don't do that. So one of the things I actually want to talk to you guys about really quick is just a skill. It's about voice inflection, or tone inflection. And simply by slowing down what you're saying, or slowing down the no, it reinforces a boundary that people understand without you actually saying something. So if I was like, no, that's not something I want to do, you could maybe convince me one way or another. But if I looked at you and I said, no, this is not something I'm going to do, you get the message there. It's the same message, but it's a totally different implication. Like, I will not do this. By slowing it down, it sends this message that this is a boundary. This is a hard and fast, no, I'm not doing it. This is a deal breaker. Period. You don't need to say anything more. And so for some of my clients that I've seen in the past, they're like, when my mom asks me to do something, or my boyfriend says this, or my girlfriend wants me to go here, and I feel like I'm so obligated, I'm like, slow your answer down. They will hear what it's saying, and that's the boundary. That's what you want to kind of enforce with those things. And then some other issues in boundaries where they fail is we withdraw from our boundaries. And basically what that means is you back out. You set a boundary, but you didn't enforce it, and you backed out of it. So the boundary didn't work. Right? So you got to make sure that the boundaries you're setting are important to you and that you're going to follow through with them. Hostility against the boundaries. If I say to somebody, I'm not doing this, and the person doesn't like what I'm saying to them, they're going to resist that and they're going to be aggressive toward that. So that can shut you down sometimes and shut the boundary out. Being over controlling. If your boundary is too invasive, if your boundary is too aggressive, you can't control everybody around you. So are your boundaries about trying to control other people, or are your boundaries about keeping you safe and protecting you? A lack of limits, no clear boundaries. It's not really understandable. It's very vague. You haven't really done a great job at defining what it is you're trying to set a boundary to protect against. And then obviously trauma can be a big issue when setting boundaries. The world is generally a reasonably safe place. So if you're setting an insane amount of boundaries because you don't feel safe, it's not a good space to be in. And that's where we want to start addressing the trauma and not necessarily boundary issues. And you'll regain control over your life in doing those things.
And just a final thought, because I know we talked a lot about other people, but this goes for the promises that you're keeping to yourself and the boundaries that you're setting for yourself and only you, right? So if you're saying like, man, I'm always, when I wake up, I grab my phone, I scroll, and I'm always late to work. Or when I wake up, I hit snooze, or I do whatever. And if you set that boundary, you say, no, I'm putting my phone in the other room and I'm not going to hit snooze. And as soon as my alarm goes off, I'm going to wake up. Mm-hmm. When you don't follow through with that, then you're pretty much telling yourself like, well, I set this thing, but I didn't really. It's kind of like we talked about with the kids. Like if you set a rule or like you try to discipline your kids and you don't actually follow through with it, the kid's like, what?
Yeah.
That's kind of confusing. Like why would they say that and then not do it? It's very kind of chaotic. Same thing goes for yourself. If you set that boundary for yourself or you set that goal for yourself and you don't follow through with it, well then why would you follow through with anything else for the day, right? Like you kind of just let yourself slide. So this goes not just for everybody else and like your relationships with everyone else in your life, this also goes for yourself too. And sometimes starting with that could be the most important thing. And it could be as small as that, like not hitting snooze and I'm not looking at my phone when I wake up. And do that for a week and see how you feel.
Right.
And then you're going to feel really, really good.
Yeah.
And then you're going to actually move forward with the other things.
Take baby steps. Try not to make something too big. Set something a little bit smaller, more manageable. Once you get a handle on that, take it a step further. And you'll build competency with it. So
yeah, that was really good. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any other questions, let us know. I'm like, that was so good. It's like, wow. There had to be some kind of issue there. We can dissect that later. But I thought
I'm sure it'll show up in the comments section when you post it.
The fuck is wrong with Lauren? No, I really thought that was good and useful because, again, this goes through everybody's life. So I haven't come up with a name for this yet, so forgive me as I stumble through this. But this is something that we've talked about for a while and something that I've wanted to do just in general. Again, I don't know what the name is. I want to have it's going to be on a Google form. It's going to be anonymous. And it's going to be, you guys can ask very detailed questions and set up scenarios, either that are affecting you or affecting other people that you know. It could be something, but we want it to be a specific scenario. And this could be for mental health questions. This could be for diet questions. This could be really for anything. And I want to set up this Google form so that we can, every once in a while, do a podcast that is very, very specific. Because a lot of times we talk not just our podcast, but all the other ones with the other coaches too. It's very, we try to bring situations in, but I always want to keep people's, situations anonymous, and I never want to overstep any boundaries there. I'll intertwine like our own stories, and share that, but rarely do we, kind of do like a client case study unless we get, full permission. So think of this as kind of like an anonymous form. So questions, case studies, what would you do in this situation? And I think particularly for the mental health questions, this will be really awesome because obviously I don't want anybody's, identities to be out, and people get uncomfortable sharing things when they know, okay, well, this person might know me or whatever. So that's going to be in the show notes as well. It'll just, like I said, Google form, anonymous. I don't know what the name of it is. I haven't come up with a cool name yet, but hey, we're going to put that there so you guys can have access to that whenever. And when you're just thinking of, because there's so many times where I've gotten questions just from people, and again, sometimes people are willing to share, but a lot of times, especially in this kind of space podcast that we would do, people don't really want to share that.
Right.
So we want to be able to help you guys. And again, this does not replace therapy. This does not replace, something like if you're actually in harm, or like clearly, there's some boundaries there, like, take care of that as you need to. But we wanted to do that. And I think it'll be useful too for other questions too, like, diet training, whatever it might be, because people do have specific stuff, and sometimes it's hard. If somebody asks me a question on Instagram, it's like, I can't really answer this, so we can give maybe some like more long discourse and kind of go back and forth. So I'm really excited about it. We'll do this every once in a while. Yeah. We've been wanting to do this. So I was trying to think of the best way to do it. And instead of people just sending in questions, here's this anonymous form that you can fill out. And we have no idea. So technology is great. Google Forms are pretty cool. My very limited skill set with Google products, but Google Forms is awesome. So thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any other questions, please let us know, and we will catch you next time.